I can explain. So, dating. Everybody's got their strats. Some take you out to the cinema, others invite you to watch lobsters wrestle. Me? My play was always, hey, wanna come over and watch some fucking cartoons? It was more successful than one would think, but as I was forcing everyone I know and liked to watch MHA, Attack on Titan, FMA, etc., one thought nagged at me almost endlessly. I wish I could show them Naruto. Now, in case you don't know me very well, I grew up with Naruto, it's one of my favorite things ever. But, if you've ever watched it yourself, then you also know that it's a bit of a hassle to say the least. As the anime was coming out alongside the manga, it employed every trick in the book to stall for time to avoid catching up. Entire seasons of filler, 10-minute long flashbacks, literal hundreds of reaction shots. You name it, Naruto did it. The flashbacks in particular are so bad that certain scenes are shown up to, no joke, 20 different times, with only a fraction of them showing any new information. And while you can use a guide to watch, that's not really a great solution either. Some episodes, which are technically canon, actually only have 2 or 3 minutes of new content, while the rest is the fucking Uchiha tragedy again! Why? I know what happened! So, over the years, an idea started brewing in my head. A custom re-edit of Naruto, tailored to my specific liking. While fan re-edits exist, like the excellent Naruto Kai and cut to manga, I personally find them kind of overly draconic. They cut out everything that isn't strictly manga-based, and while that does eliminate the issue, it also robs the series of some of the best original moments. No, I want to do this myself. But it's a big task, and I could never find a good excuse to actually do it. So, when my girlfriend and I ran out of stuff to watch, I finally popped the question. Would you watch Naruto with me if I edited it to be less ass to watch?
Sure, babe.
With that green light, I got to work, and thus, the Ocean Cut was born. Now, before I explain to you my journey, here's the basic gist of it. It's an English dub. Sorry, not sorry, this is a dub watching household and it's my preferred version, so I was always gonna do it like this. Naruto Kai is in sub, so this way my project felt more justified since I was making something new, and personally I've always liked the Naruto dub, it's fairly fun. The process I settled on was to condense multiple TV episodes into movie-sized videos, each between 50 minutes and 2 hours long. Openings would only play once per video, and endings were only included when I thought they enriched the experience. Not all filler was removed. Remember, I didn't want this to be just a cut-to-manga project. Some filler is actually really good, while other filler is just an adaptation of supplementative material like the novels, so I ended up including some anime original material per my own judgment. Isolated filler episodes with no bespoke arcs that nonetheless warranted being included ended up in so-called special episodes, which are themed compilations of good filler that revolve around similar stuff. So for example, Special Number 1 contains all filler episodes centered on unmasking Kakashi. There was only a single change to the canon storyline that I allowed myself. This was something I knew from the beginning I had to do now that I had the chance, and I will explain it once we get to Shippuden. I will tell you if and how you can watch the Ocean Cut at the end. With that out of the way, here's how it went. First, Part 1, or Classic Naruto. Starting out, I first decided to do something I'm very bad at usually. Set up a way to organize stuff. Naruto is 720 episodes long, and I was going to not only use all of that, but also had to have the entire soundtrack ready for any possible cuts that needed it so I could bridge them better. So, after some initial setup, I got going and was very quickly surprised by how fun this was. Making executive decisions with all the video material present was a really neat experience. However, I also immediately noticed how many cuts and edits were going to be left entirely to my judgment. Some things, like fat flashbacks, were objectively removable, but what about, say, Konohamaru's introduction? He is a canon character, but fairly unimportant. However, he does need to exist in the story for later stuff, but his intro, being literally episode 2 of the entire series, really kills the pace at the start. In the end, I completely removed all of episode 2 because A, it focuses way too much on the sexy jutsu gag, which as an adult man I don't really find funny anymore, and B, all important substance of this introduction is either repeated or reintroduced through Konohamaru's subsequent appearances. So, I judge this to be a decent sacrifice for the sake of getting into the good stuff faster. I also ended up scrapping Naruto's diarrhea shenanigans, since it really is only early 2000s fluff that, again, isn't all that funny in hindsight. I was careful though to retain all character moments pertaining to Sakura and the real Sasuke, since that stuff is obviously kind of important. You will notice that as I go on, there will be a lot of choices to make like this, where I have to weigh against, is it worth deleting this and saving a little time, or is this scene actually too important for that? But as I said, I will explain my thought process on the more controversial examples like this one. Aside from this though, most of part 1 was actually kind of easy, with many obvious cuts to make. Recap episodes? Gone. Random multi-minute flashbacks? Gone. I used my access to the original soundtrack to make the cuts as clean as possible. However, that's not to say it was completely smooth sailing. Compiling 20-minute episodes into a movie format is harder than you might think, because many episodes are structured so that they end on a cliffhanger. That cliffhanger is then often repeated with different music or even different animation at the start of the next episode, and splicing that together was often quite a challenge. Speaking of animation, as you clearly know, TV anime can often look quite inconsistent, and Naruto is absolutely an example of that. Usually, the differences are negligible or happen between scene cuts, so it's not too jarring. But then there's shit like episode 29, arguably the worst looking episode in all of Naruto, which is immediately followed by the infamously gorgeous episode 30. These two styles back to back are almost impossible to marry, which resulted in quite a few janky cuts, unfortunately. However, this approach stayed mostly the same as I went through the series. I added some Shippuden filler episodes that flesh out Sasuke and Naruto's relationship to part 1, where I replaced the spoilery Shippuden OPs with part 1 OPs, and then added a neat little transition between the two aspect ratios. I just thought it was important to have more Sasuke-Naruto time while they are still both in the village, just so, later stuff feels a bit more appropriate, Another little extra spice I did was translate any important Japanese text in the world. This was most useful in the Chunin exams, where having the names show up on screen was very cool. My girlfriend even made a whole brainstorming sheet trying to predict who would fight who, and she actually got almost all of it right. Love ya, babe. However, I soon encountered a new roadblock: Jiraiya. You see, his introduction has aged absolutely terribly, with him throwing out bangers like,
You have quite a tight, sexy little body.
Good news, this is almost all anime original filler. In the manga, Jiraiya just kinda decides to train Naruto without all the harassment shenanigans beforehand. Bad news though, the anime made this filler such that you can't just cut it out, since Jiraiya's entire reasoning to train Naruto is tied to this sex offender nonsense. So, like a normal person, I looked for other voice performances by Jiraiya's voice actor in other series and spliced them together to make him say what I needed. This was, as you can imagine, incredibly janky, and I'm probably gonna redo it if I ever revisit the project. It was also around here that I started intentionally leaving fillery stuff in, however. For example, Gamabunta's challenge to Naruto is entirely original, but I decided it was a fun way to see more of Bunta early on, and cutting it out would have been the kind of hassle I didn't want right after my Jiraiya Odyssey. Besides that, part 1 was mostly a breeze. Cut down Orochimaru and Hiruzen's staring contest, added the Kakashi mask stuff as an optional special episode since I wanted more non-evil Sasuke, left the Tsunade arc mostly the same honestly, and whoops, we arrive at the first proper filler arc, the Land of Tea. Yeah, I cut that shit out so fast, it's so boring and badly animated, don't bother with it. Not much more to be done on part 1 to be honest. Sasuke retrieval is great and was mostly about cutting down flashbacks and condensing information, which was pretty easy. I did cut out one piece of Sakura's dialogue because, holy shit Kishimoto, what? The single biggest edit came right at the end though. As you maybe know, the final canon episodes of part 1 are episode 135, episode 144, and episode 220. Yeah. Because part 1 ends on a whopping 90 episodes of filler, the ending scenes of this part are distributed very stupidly, so I had to hunt them all down and splice them into a coherent sequence. This was more time-consuming than it was difficult, and one fancy end card later, part 1 was done! Except there was one last thing to do. Kakashi Gaiden. Yes, in the manga, Kakashi's backstory is shown between the two parts, which I find a much more intuitive and fitting placement. In the anime, they only show this right around the time Sasuke fights Itachi, which is very weird and also ends up soft spoiling a certain reveal unnecessarily. But because Gaiden is in Shippuden, it has one of Shippuden's OPs. In order to both not spoil anything and give the episode its distinctive vibe, I animated a super basic OP myself and played just a few seconds of the actual OP song as a sort of teaser for Shippuden. With that, however, came part 2, and things were about to get messy. All of the issues I mentioned prior, the slow pace, the overuse of flashbacks, the heavy reliance on filler and weird structuring, all of those were present in part 1, but they hadn't reached their final form yet. No, it isn't until Shippuden where the adaptation really went off the rails. For example, episode 1 of Shippuden starts with the scene where Naruto finds Sasuke again. I get what they were going for, but it ends up being seriously disorienting in a not good way, and spoils a very cool moment for basically no reason. So I cut this out, and had the episode start with Konohamaru's homage. This would, however, only be the first of many changes I ended up making. For starters, Shippuden's pace early on is terrible. The first arc alone takes 9 whole episodes to even start. Problem is, I couldn't just cut out stuff because part 2 has this annoying tendency to overlay crucial dialogue over very long, very repetitive scenes, and unless the music and sound design of a scene were very quiet, I couldn't just splice them into other moments. It would have been too much of a mess. So, begrudgingly, I had to leave Kazekage Rescue and Tenchi Bridge mostly the same for time reasons, only trimming out some more egregious flashbacks. This was easily the lowest point of the project, because once we actually got to watching the Ocean Cuts version of the Tenchi Bridge arc especially, its tectonic pacing stood out so much that my girlfriend straight up asked me if we could just skip ahead to the end of the arc, and if I can just tell her what happens. And I can't blame her. After getting used to the more breezy pacing of the Ocean Cut, going back to the original series and at its worst paced part to boot was agonizing. So yeah, this was totally an oversight on my part, and if I end up doing a second pass on this project, I'll definitely spend some time coming up with a solution for this section, because holy hell, why the fuck does Orochimaru walking up to a bridge take up 7 minutes? Anyway, luckily, this remained an isolated incident, as both my editing and the pacing of the actual show got better. As a side note though, it was also here that I had to figure out how to deal with episode names. You see, in part 1, the episodes would freeze frame and Naruto would shout the episode title, which was easy enough to cut. In Shippuden, however, the Japanese title fades in over actual important scenes, which was a bit of a pickle. For the first title of any Ocean Cut episode, I just overlaid the translated title over the Japanese text, old school style. However, since any one Ocean Cut episode is made up of 3 to 5 TV episodes, that meant that there would randomly be text on screen, which I wasn't fond of. For some simpler scenes, I could use some editing trickery to make the text disappear, but generally, the animation under the text was too complicated for me to seamlessly edit. So, I decided that just leaving the titles in would be less jarring than any botched edit I could throw together. Again, my main goal was for this to be a smooth watch, and I decided that it's more smooth to just accept that there's Japanese text on screen than to watch an editor struggling to make images fit together. But enough of that, now it's time for something fun, because after Tenchi Bridge, I had to deal with the series' very first proper big filler arc, the 12 Guardian Monks. This is an arc I actually watched in full in a personal rewatch, and while it fleshes out Asuma a little and introduces Pseudo Jinjuriki, a concept Kishimoto liked so much he would later canonize it, the arc as a whole is rather bad, so I knew I was going to cut it out. However, it was a little tricky because of how Shippuden does filler arcs. The 90 episodes of filler in part 1 sound daunting, but because the story was mostly over, they were entirely unconnected and so really easy to cut. Fun fact, they were scraping the bottom of the barrel so hard, episode 202 is literally just the top 5 fights list in Naruto. But in Shippuden, every filler arc tries to feel important by having both its build-up and its conclusion bleed into canon content. So throughout all of Shippuden, whenever I got close to a filler arc, I had to sift through the surrounding canon episodes to make sure I didn't leave in any weird dialogue. And I mostly succeeded, with a few odd lines about grave robbers making it into the final cut, which like, hey, Naruto goes on missions off-screen all the time, so it's excusable. At least that's what I tell myself. Moving on though, my life got a lot easier as we got into the Akatsuki suppression arc. This is probably the best adapted section, with essentially no nonsense. The only interesting choice I had to make, besides again, flashback mowing, was to leave in this scene. Why is that a choice? Because this scene is entirely filler. Yes, one of the single best moments in all of Naruto actually doesn't happen in the manga, which is crazy. But to me, it was obvious that this needed to stay, especially since my girlfriend had started to really like Shikamaru. Anyway, bada boom bada beanie, hit Kakuzu in the weenie and we wrap on this arc. Next would be the Three Tails arc, and just like with the previous filler arc, I cut it out. Yes, Isobu does very briefly mention meeting Naruto before way later, but I decided that that short mention is not worth watching 12 episodes of complete nonsense for. With that out of the way, however, I got to the middle of part 2, largely considered one of the best stretches of Naruto as a whole, which ended up being also one of the trickiest stretches for me. You see, the order of events here is everyone hunts for Itachi, Jiraiya's mission, Sasuke vs Itachi, Six Tails, Pain. While this order works, I always thought it's weird to cut away from the Itachi hunt to Jiraiya and to let the Itachi fight cook on the back burner. So I switched some stuff around. I had the Itachi fight happen right at the end of Itachi hunt. The way I justified this to myself is that Jiraiya leaving on a mission to then not appear for a while makes more sense than everybody hunting Itachi only for the series to cut away to Jiraiya. Also, the end of Jiraiya's arc leads fairly well into the Six Tails arc, as it ends up cutting back to Naruto. And yes, I included the Six Tails arc for 3 reasons. It's kinda good, it gets referenced very heavily later on, and I wanted to create a little space between Jiraiya dying and Naruto finding out, for an extra bit of drama, you know? This also handily separated Sasuke finding out about Itachi from his mission at Unraikyo Pass, since I thought that this shot is a good point to cut away and pace Sasuke's appearances a bit more evenly. But most importantly was how I handled Tobi. You see, the reveal that he's actually not an idiot happens 3 separate times, and it's always treated like a big surprise. This left me in the fun position where I got to decide which reveal comes first, and I chose this one, cause, come on, it's so good.
What? I don't believe it! Kidding.
It's just as I expected.
I didn't cut out the other reveals, just pushed them back to be after this one. As you can see, this was a fairly messy back and forth, where I debated and changed many things, and it led to a pretty serious issue, which you will see shortly. But for now, we move into the Pain arc, an absolute highlight of the series. Luckily, I actually didn't have to do almost anything here until the very end. You see, that is where the anime started getting really aggressive with fillers, for reasons that we might never know. Whatever the case may be, this led to the tail end of the Pain arc to be a bit of a mess. For example, did you know that in between Naruto defeating Pain and Naruto finding Nagato, the anime adds a mini filler arc that shows the Kid Gang going on a treasure hunt set by the 4th Hokage, where the treasure is a piece of paper that tells them to be nice to each other? Yeah, you see what I mean with aggressively filler? Anyway, this was cut out fairly simply, luckily. And so, after I obviously also cut out the 20 or so episodes of filler after Pain, we have one final hurdle left. The biggest one of them all. The War arc. As an infamously fat arc, there was much to do here, so let's go through it. So, remember how I said there was an issue I forgot about during the Itachi arc? So, in that arc, Naruto meets Itachi and has a chat with him, the contents of which do not get revealed until the start of the Pain arc. Yeah, so I straight up forgot to add that scene back in after I reordered stuff. Yep, massive oopsie on my part, and one that was a little tricky to fix. You see, by the time I noticed, me and my girlfriend had already gotten past the point where the talk scene would naturally have been shown, so retroactively adding it wasn't an option. However, it absolutely needed to be in since it establishes an important plot point. But I couldn't just half-assedly throw it in, much less in the middle of the final arc. Remember, a big goal of this project was to make Naruto easy and seamless to watch. It really seemed like a major pickle until I noticed that in that scene, Itachi mentions that Naruto might have to deal with Sasuke being branded a criminal, and I remembered that Naruto has a big emotional standoff with Karui at the start of the Kage Summit arc about Sasuke being branded a criminal. So, a quick edit later, the puzzle pieces fit together, the scene was back in, and it felt as natural as ever. Crisis averted. The Kage Summit itself had a few tricky bits too. The fights between Kisame and Bee and the one between Sasuke and Danzo happen semi-simultaneously, which I found unintuitive, so I switched some stuff around to give both of these fights their own bespoke Ocean Cut episodes. Another hurdle that came up here, and remained a pain in the ass for the entire war arc, were the pseudo-canon episodes. You see, while most filler guides correctly mark all the explicitly filler episodes, many miss out on this particularly devious flavor of filler, where an episode only has about 2 minutes of canon material and the rest is entirely composed of flashbacks. For example, as Naruto heads to save Sakura from her plan, he spends 20 minutes reliving his entire relationship with Sasuke. It isn't filler, but it is. You know what I mean? These episodes began popping up very frequently, and so I had to slow down and comb through even nominatively canon episodes to look out for this crap. It was at the end of Kage Summit that I also had to make a choice that I had been dreading since I started the project. Do I include the Power arc? In case you don't know, Power, or Chikara, was a filler arc meant to celebrate the 500th episode of the anime, and it is drop-dead gorgeous. However, it is 6 episodes long and essentially spoils much of the war arc by using its elements prematurely, namely the revived ninja. It technically comes way later in the story, but because I was trying to make these things as seamless as possible, the only place it could fit would be between Kage Summit and the war starting. So, did I want to add in around 2.5 hours of filler that only detracts from the canon content to come, only to show it to someone who, sorry sweetie, doesn't really care that much about animation quality? As you can guess, I ended up not including it, which was tough, but in the end, more efficient and appropriate for the product I wanted to make. And once the war arc actually started going, things did not get easier. In my head I thought, well, some of these episodes focus on the revived ninja, so they might be worth including. Wrong. You see, while the revival filler episodes are neat at times, the vast majority of them are completely pointless because most of them end with nothing happening. Because the anime's war arc aired at the same time as the manga was going through its version of it, the filler could not actually have even the most minor named character do anything actually important, because who knows, they might come up again in the canon. Thus, you get episodes where, for example, it focuses on Pakura, a very cool minor reanimated ninja. But because she is named and thus could have come up later, the anime can't actually do anything with her, so her episode is just people talking about her. It's very frustrating. But anyway, the war arc is very big, so let's speed it up a bit so you're not here all day. I kept up the usual routine of trimming down flashbacks, eliminating unnecessary reaction shots and repeat scenes, etc. I also kept up adding text to Japanese characters, which was especially useful during moments like the Izanami explanation. Besides that, the rest of the war was actually fairly uneventful, just making my way through the various events, all the way to Kaguya Otsutsuki. I kept in her backstory flashback because while it is filler, it is good and she desperately needs it. And I also added a little bit of Indra and Ashura filler to make the transition a little smoother and give this whole lore dump a little more context. But that was basically it for the manga canon content, and before long I had finished up the regular Shippuden storyline. But I was not done. As you surely know, the anime version of Naruto doesn't end the same way the manga does, instead adding a lot of extra stuff from the light novels. And because most of that stuff is really good, I of course added it in. The 3 novel adaptations, as well as the last, are part of the regular episodes, while I added the excellent Boyhood arc as an optional side special. Also, yes, the last is mandatory viewing in this house, bite me. I also condensed the wedding arc a little, since some of the episodes are better and more important than others in my opinion. And lastly, I put the light novel adaptations in order, because for some reason they adapted them in the wrong order in the anime. The Sasuke arc is supposed to be the last one before the wedding, whereas in the original anime it was adapted first, for whatever reason. With the ending right around the corner, I set out to produce the biggest change yet. A completely custom credit sequence which used a basic cherry blossom animation made by myself, while Polaroids of the various characters, also made by me, fly in and out to tell you what each character is up to after the end of the series, set to the series' actual final ending song, Zetsu Zetsu. This was an idea I had since the start, and I thought it would be a sweet way to tie up the project. The actual text is written by me and is a combination of canonical info from Boruto and some tasteful creative liberties on my part. I could kind of do whatever I wanted since we had decided early on that we were not going to watch Boruto, like sane people. So I tried to balance it between both adding things that I thought were appropriate and adding things that are canonically from Boruto. This is also where I made that one and only definitive change to the canon that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, namely to the fates of Orochimaru and Kabuto. It never sat right with me that these two vile criminals just get off scot-free at the end of the series, especially since the ending makes such a big deal about Sasuke atoning for his much less egregious sins. So I changed their ending in the final text blurb, because I'm in control, and why not? It's something that's always bothered me, so I decided now that I have the chance, I might as well scratch that itch. And, finally, at the end of this sequence, once we reach Naruto, I added the Hokage ceremony from the Boruto OVA, while of course carefully cutting out the terrible joke that scene was originally centered around. And, as Naruto takes up the mantle and smiles, the ocean cut ends. So, let's talk about if it was worth it. First, the numbers. If you watch all of canon Naruto, it takes around 250 hours, which is roughly 10 days and 10 hours of continuous watching. If you watched the ocean cut, it will take you 135 hours, which is 5 days and 12 hours. So on a purely numerical side, the ocean cut does, indeed, cut. But this isn't worth anything if the actual experience isn't enjoyable. A big priority for me was to make it as seamless as possible after all. I showed the ocean cut to a few friends who were already familiar with Naruto, and while no one has actually finished it yet, understandably, feedback seems positive so far, so yay! And what about my initial motivator? What did my girlfriend think of Naruto and by extension, the ocean cut?
It was surprisingly probably one of the best shows that you've shown me so far.
Well, that sounds like it can't have been that bad. Okay, well, I have stalled long enough. Let's get to the question you're probably burning to ask.